Okay, I promise this one will be shorter than the last one. I'm sorry, the last one took over 18 minutes. Let's talk about properties of soils. And this is something you will see on the AP test. That is a guaranteed promise. All right. Now, in order for a soil to be fertile, in order to be useful for growing plants, and as humans, let's face it, we're talking about agriculture. Obviously, it's important to ecosystems, but for us to eat, we need the agricultural soil. It's got to be able to retain enough water for plants to grow over the course of a season. So, like to grow when it's not raining. They have to be able to drain away excess water because if plants' roots have too much water, they can't breathe and they suffocate and they die. And it has to have sufficient aeration so that the microbes in the soil and the roots are able to grow. So you've got to have basically, you have to have nutrients, you have to be able to hold water but drain water and allow for air to get into the crevices. So again, let's just go this one more time. Porosity. Remember, porosity refers to the spaces between the soil particles that can be filled with either air or water. And so we find is that fertile soils, they have quite a bit of pore space because if they don't, it's difficult to grow things because you need these pores in order to have both water and oxygen. So plant roots need to breathe. Their cells, they have to respire. So they need access to oxygen. They also need access to water. So we need to have soils that are going to be useful for plants, fertile. They have to have plenty of pore space. But too much of a good thing is not a good thing necessarily. So they also have to be permeable. A permeable means that the pores are connected to each other, and so it can drain excess water. So if something is permeable, that means liquids can flow or fluids can flow through it. In this case, liquids, water in particular. So soils that have a low permeability, that means that they're not going to drain very well. That if there's not a lot of connections between the pores, water gets in, but it can't get out. And so these things tend to not be very good for growing plants. The roots suffocate because there's no oxygen for them. Soils that have high permeability, on the other hand, drain so quickly that they don't retain water long enough, and therefore the plants aren't able to get enough water for photosynthesis, and they die for that reason. So you can see, you got to hit it just right if the plants are going to be happy, and we want the plants to be happy so they'll grow and give us food to eat. So I like this diagram here. I think this sums it up pretty well. So let's think in terms of the density of the soil, like how compact it is, and soil porosity, how much it has in terms of open space that can be filled with water or air. So what we see here is we got a lot of plants when conditions are like this, and we don't have any plants when the conditions are like this. So basically, if the density of the soil is high, so this line represents density, going up means high density. High density is really not good because what that means is there's not a lot of airspace. Air doesn't weigh much. Soil material, like rock material, does. So high density is usually bad because what it means is you'll have low porosity, and we need porosity. So what causes us to get to this point here? Well, if we end up like driving mechanized things like tractors and stuff on soil, we can end up compressing the soil and turn it into a high density, low porosity soil that isn't much good for agricultural purposes. Now what we see is as the porosity increases, here the porosity is going up, 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 up. Well, the density is naturally going to go down because these pores don't weigh anything, and so we find that is a high porosity, low density soils support lots of plants, whereas high density, low porosity soils do not. Makes sense to me. I don't know about you. Okay. The three main components of soil that we have to concern ourselves with are sand, silt, and clay. That's it. All right. And they each play an important role here. All right. So basically, the difference between sand, silt, and clay is particle size primarily, but also composition when it comes to clay. So big is sand, small is clay. Okay. Now, sand is basically made out of quartz. Quartz is what glass is made out of. So, and it's very chemically resistant material, so it doesn't weather chemically very well. It is also mechanically pretty strong. So when you walk on a beach and you see all that sand, that white sand, that's just quartz material. That's part of rock material that just does not dissolve. It doesn't break up very well. Now, sand provides lots of pore space. So if you ever poured water on the sand at a beach when you're a kid, it just goes right through there, right? There's high porosity, high permeability in sand. So that's one good thing. It's also structurally pretty sound. I think it's a lot easier to walk on sand than it is to walk on mud, isn't it? Because it provides more structure. And we need structure for plants to grow. We don't want them sinking in. So the deal is, if soil has a high sand content, it's going to drain too quickly. Think beach. If it has a low sand content, then it's not going to drain very well. Think mud. It's just going to you're going to have water. It's going to be waterlogged. Now, silt, what's that? Well, silt is the same thing as sand. It's just a smaller size. All right, but because it's smaller, it has more surface area and it's able to hold more water. They have the same amount of surface on sand and water would hold the same amount. But if you think about it, a smaller particle size, how do I say this? If I have equal volume containers, one filled with sand and one filled with silt, there's a lot more surface area in the one filled with silt than there is with sand. So therefore, I can hold a lot more water moisture on the surface of the silt. All right, but they fit into little holes between the sand, right? So what happens is, instead of filling my pores with air and water, I'm filling them with silt. So silt has a tendency to reduce porosity and therefore reduce the connectivity between the pores, meaning the permeability goes down. But because silt has a high surface to volume ratio, it does help retain water. And one thing about silts is that when rivers flood, there's a lot of silt comes spills out into what we call the floodplain, and it often carries with it a lot of nutrients. And so these silt-rich soils do tend to be very good soils, very rich soils. And so we find that a lot of agricultural takes place in these fertile riverbank areas known as floodplains, which is a shame because people live there often have to deal with floods. All right, clay. Clay is uh, a type of rock material that's made by weathering very common minerals known as feldspars or phyllosilicates, muscovite, and biotite. And what happens is, these three mineral types, when they get exposed to groundwater, they tend to be chemically altered into a substance that we call clay. Clay particles are very, very small, and the outer surfaces of them tend to be negatively charged, and that allows them to hold water, which is really important. They're the best. They're very small, which helps hold water, and they have a little bit of negative charge on the surface, which helps them hold water also. Now, the thing is, though, if you have too much clay present, because it's so small, it really does dramatically limit the porosity and permeability, and it really prevents water from draining. So the trick is to have just the right amount of all three of these things: sand, silt, and clay. You get the right amount, you got magic. You got the wrong amount, you got a problem. All right, let's take a look at this. First of all, let's take a look. This is kind of interesting. Here's a river. Clay particles being the smallest, stay suspended the longest. So when rivers are flooding, they carry a lot of clay out to the sea, where it then clumps together when it hits all the ions that are present in seawater. It clumps together. We call it flocculating, and it makes these clumps of clay that then sink to the bottom out here. But the point I'm trying to make here is that clay stays suspended in water longer than anything else because it has such a small particle size that it's easy for it to remain in suspension in rivers. Okay, so here we go. Sand and silt, made of the same thing, quartz. It's just a difference in size. Here, if we compare them, here it is, here it is. So you can see that the silt is considerably smaller. Clay, even smaller, and they have it a little flat, which is good because these minerals are plate shaped. That's what they call phyllosilicates. Phylo is like a type of dough, right? So anyway, it just means flat, platey. So I like this one here. So if this yellow one is a sand grain, then the blue one is what a silt grain would look like, and the red one is about the size of a clay particle, except a clay particle wouldn't be round like that. Okay, now we talk about different types of soils. Loam is what we're after. So a loam is a type of soil that has a great mixture of sand, silt, and clay. Loamy soils are the best for agriculture. They have the right amount of water retention and drainage and structural support. And so the ideal proportions for loam would be 40% sand, 40% silt, and the remaining 20% clay. Of course, we also want to have a lot of organic material mixed in there, but we're just in terms of these three primary particles. Now, this one here just shows, like, okay, look, here are different soil properties we could concern ourselves with. Aeration, like how much air can you get in there? Well, sandy soils you can get a lot in. Clays you can hardly get any in. Drainage, well, sand drains great. Loam, pretty well. Clay-rich soil, hardly at all. The ability to, say, hold water. Well, sandy soils can't hold much water. Loams have a medium ability. Clay soil can hold a lot, but if you want to grow things in it, you've got to be able to till the soil. What we find is, well, sandy soil you can till really easily, but it's got all these other problems. Loam is pretty moderate and has all these good things. So, and clay is really difficult to till. So you can see, loam is really what we're after here. Now, you got to learn how to read one of these charts. They're at first they just seem like a mystery, but I'm here to help you, and they're actually kind of cool. So the idea is we have three different M members, right? We have silt, sand, and clay. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start here. No, this over here is our silt side. So notice we have the number 100. This is 100% silt and 0% this, which is sand. So if I go from this is 0 silt to 100% silt. This is 0% sand up to 10, 20, 100% sand. This is 0% clay up to 60, 70, 80, 90, 100% clay. Okay? That's how you interpret these charts. So we have three different scales laid out as an equilateral triangle, always going from 0 to 100 of silt on this side, sand on this side, clay on this side. Let's see how this works. So here I have a soil that's 15% sand, 60% silt, and 25% clay, and we want to know how we categorize it. So here's what we do. We say, look, we've got 15% sand. So here is the sand portion of it. Here's 0% sand. Here's 100% sand. So now watch what I'm going to do. So for the sand, I'm going to say this is 15% sand. That gets me to here, right? Now look at this line I draw. Mr. Sanchez, why am I drawing the line this way? Because I'm drawing it parallel to the line that represents 0 of that portion. So this line here represents 0 sand. So I'm going to draw a line here at 15%. So everywhere along here is 15% sand. I'm 15 from this 0 line, okay? Silt is 60%. So here's the silt axis. 50, here's 60 on the silt axis. So I have to draw that line parallel to 0 silt. So here's the 0 line for silt. So I had to draw my line parallel to that at 60. And it's 25% clay. So here's the clay axis. So I'm going to go up to 25, and I'm going to draw a line that's parallel to the 0 line for clay. So this is 0 clay here. So I draw my line here. They all intersect here. So we would consider this soil to be categorized as a silty clay loam. Now, you don't have to memorize these things, okay? But you do have to be able to read one of these charts. You will get one of these charts on the test. I'm not really sure why they push this on the AP test, but they do, so you're going to learn it. So let's just try this one here. How would I categorize the soil if I found it was comprised of 50% sand, 20% silt, and 30% clay? So I'm going to go to the sand axis here, okay? And I'm going over to 50%. So here's 50%. So this is my 0 line for sand here, right? So I go to 50 and I draw this line here, okay? And then I would go to 20% silt. So here's silt. I go to 20%. Now I have to draw a line that's parallel to the 0 line, which is this way here. So here I go. And where do those two intersect? Those two happen to intersect right here. Now, I could go ahead and draw that. Once I got 2 of them, I don't need to draw the third one. By the way, that can save you some time. But if I did draw that third one from this point here, it would be 30% clay. And I'd say, here's clay, here's 30%, here's a line. And notice they all intersect right here. I have a sandy clay loam. Okay, so we're going to have to practice this some. We're going to do a lab with this, and you're going to get good at this.